This video could be a little controversial, so please note the disclaimers. These types of videos can get people feeling a little defensive sometimes because it can feel like I'm actually speaking to you directly, telling you how to live when you might be thinking, my life sounds terrible. I don't travel abroad, I don't even own a Stanley Cup. Who am I to talk? It's impossible to actually speak to people of incredibly varied ages, income brackets, locations all over America and the entire world. Some of you watching are probably rich beyond my wildest dreams, and some of you have probably endured life circumstances that are very difficult and make everything a lot more challenging for you. Some of you probably live an hour drive from the nearest decent grocery store. Some of you probably live in a country where like everything is super expensive. There are so many different lives in the entire world. There is no way that a video like this can speak to every circumstance possible. This video is about the steps that I in particular took to get me where I am today, to avoid working full-time for somebody else for my entire life. Which isn't to say that I haven't worked full-time with me as the worst boss imaginable. My fellow self-employed people know how this is. Of course, it always helps to have some advantages in life, whether that's financial, educational, locational, etc. And I can't emphasize enough that most people would not want to do this. Very few people would look at this life and think that is the way.
This is the way.
In fact, I would basically say that if you can do something else without going crazy, then you probably should. I'm Lydia Foxglove, and I am a fantasy author. And it's true that I have never worked full-time for anybody else in my entire life. The closest I got was my first job where I worked 30 hours-ish in retail a week. I have had years where I worked more than full-time for myself, sometimes with both writing and some all-consuming side hustle when things got dicey. Most creative people have that period in life where things do get a little dicey. I'm going to outline my best advice for how to set up a life that maximizes your creative freedom. And as with most things, there are no guarantees. And there have been many times in my life that I wished I could just work a 9-to-5 and come home and like play some video games or something, write a little on the weekends, not put so much pressure on myself. But for me, I go crazy when I can't create on my own schedule or when I'm not creating at all. The idea of working 40 hours a week at some job, even a job that I enjoy, I just feel like I would be very miserable and that my stories would be pounding at the doors of my brain constantly, and that eventually I would either have to like smother them and murder them and I would feel their loss, or I would just be endlessly tormented by their presence that I didn't have time to fully acknowledge. It's possible that this is more of a mental illness that I have turned into a career path, but that's probably true for more than 0 other creative people. I do know that a lot of people in my generation, the millennials and younger, have been struggling with the idea of having to go work a 9-to-5. There's a stereotype like those damn millennials, those kids, the Gen Zers, the Gen Alphas who aren't old enough to work yet, but we've already got our eye on them. Nobody wants to work. I'm not sure that's really true because people have always said that about the youth. But I also say, go us. No, we don't want to work. I mean, I actually do like to work, but I don't really see why people should, like every single person in the world should have to be working so hard all the time like medieval peasants. Like, why are we inventing anything? Machines that are more productive if we're going to work exactly as hard as humans have through all of history. Who is benefiting from that labor? Where is all that labor going? I'm quite sure that as a society, we could choose to allow everyone to work a little less and have more time to enjoy themselves or to create art. So if some of us want to find creative ways to seize back some of that time for ourselves, again, I say, go us. It does require setting aside a consumerist mindset in a lot of cases to work less. We would probably have to become a little less consumerist as a society because a lot of the human labor is spent creating all the extra stuff. And probably a lot of human labor is going to be spent fixing the mess we made by creating so much extra stuff. But, you know, all I can account for is my own self. And I also want to say, if you feel like you are just really trapped right now in a situation where you have to work very hard and you don't really see a way out, I just want to give you a metaphorical hug, which I know it doesn't mean a whole lot. Even a real hug probably doesn't mean a whole lot when you're just like tired and feeling kind of ground down and hopeless every day. But just know that I don't want to like pile on. And if the whole concept of here's things you can do to have more freedom and you feel like you don't even have that option and you're not really in a space to watch this video right now, I understand. Anyway, let's get to the list of things that I would do to set myself up for a creative life, because they are the things that I did. Number 1, avoid debt at all costs. And this usually means, as it probably won't surprise you if you've watched my video about my educational background, usually means don't go to college unless someone else is paying for it. Family member, scholarship, or you really wanted to go to college and you saved up a lot of money in high school somehow. Or if you really, really want to go to college and you have a plan for how you're going to pay it off. I'm not saying no one should go to college, especially if you really enjoy it or have a reason for it. It's just not the focus of this particular video. And even if you like this advice, your parents might not like this advice. But if you want to be a creative for a living, in most cases, a degree is just going to saddle you with debt that you're always going to have to reckon with, and it will limit your financial choices. And you're probably not going to make a lot of money for paying off that debt. I mean, there's people who are like, you know, got a real job like a nurse or something who are struggling to pay off college debt right now. So if you want to be a novelist or a painter or something like that, you really should think twice before getting college debt. You can really learn all the necessary skills on your own. You can make a lot of great connections on your own. Whenever I see those like budgets of adults and it's like, here's their mortgage and here's their college debt that's like as much or more as their mortgage, it is like an eye-popping revelation to me. I cannot believe how much people are paying for their college loans. There is no way that I would be where I am if I was paying hundreds of dollars a month to pay off my college loans. That's just a fact. And of course, this doesn't just apply to college. You should do everything possible to avoid any kind of long-term debt except like a house or something that is ultimately going to benefit you financially or save you money. And sometimes there's an emergency and you can't avoid debt, but a lot of debt is consumer debt for things that we don't need. Avoid all of that. Number 2, educate yourself about finances as soon as possible. If you are a broke teenager working in a fast food restaurant and you don't have any money, I would still say check a book out from the library on finances, or join a Reddit on finances, or just any kind of little background thread that will start to teach you about finances. Because a great time to learn about finances is before you need to know about them, because then the moment that you have some extra money or you have some kind of fork in the road where you have to make a choice about finances, you will already have the knowledge to know what to do. This is particularly true as I film this because when I was young, interest rates were extremely low and there was really nowhere that you could park your money that was safe and was going to make really much of a return at all. Which isn't to say I probably shouldn't have been parking it somewhere anyway, because even a little return is better than like no return. But right now, as I film this, interest rates are high. So if you have any money sitting around in like your local bank and it's barely making any return, it's a great time to learn about all the options for where you could stick that money for any period of time, even just a high yield savings account. And they also say that you shouldn't time the stock market, which is generally true. But I do always kind of pay attention to it, because if there's ever like a crash and everybody starts to panic about how low the stock market is, if I have any extra money, I stick it in the stock market right then and there. I did this during the 2008 crash. I had a few $1,000s, and I did it during the pandemic crash, which only lasted like a couple days. And just in general, I think it's good to be aware of what's going on. I think it's weird when I see people who are like 25 freaking out about the stock market going down and their retirement accounts. Like, you're not retiring anytime soon. The stock market will definitely go up. Obviously, if you're getting close to retirement, that's a whole other story. And there's always the fear that the whole world could go down the tubes and like no stocks will be worth anything, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, if that happens, we have other problems to worry about. Another case of where it's good to be just aware of financial terms and what is going on in the financial world is, again, with the interest rates. I bought this house in 2019 and I ended up refinancing it when interest rates were like rock bottom, which means that my mortgage got really cheap. So right now interest rates are very high, and obviously don't buy a house if you can't afford the interest rates as they are. And this might only be true for America, because I've heard that America is the only country with 30-year fixed mortgages. I don't know if that's true. Another YouTube channel kind of made a vague reference to that. But anyway, if you are American, just know that if interest rates go down, you can refinance your house and your mortgage payment will get cheaper. And I had no idea about any of that when I bought my first house, but I learned about it over time. And because I did, I was aware when they got really cheap, like, I could refinance my house. And for the rest of my life with this mortgage, my interest rate is locked in at this historically low rate, which is a huge benefit. And I could have easily just missed it or not even been aware that that was a thing. And it's a pain to refinance your house. It's almost like buying a house all over again. You have to like go through all this paperwork and approval, and you have to go re-meet with the bank mortgage people. It's like it takes some time and some expense to do it, but it was definitely worth it. So I'm not going to go through a whole financial education in this YouTube video because that would take forever. And there's still plenty of things that I don't know, especially if I have to call someone on the phone. I will like easily lose $1,000 rather than call a real person on the phone that I don't know to talk about my certificate of deposit or something. But anyway, it's just good to get a basic financial education as soon as you can, how to buy a house and credit scores and all that stuff, and keep a monthly budget. I wish I'd started doing this sooner. I thought that I was really good with my budget anyway, and I was, but I started keeping a monthly budget a few years ago, and that was when I would catch things like our infamous month of fried chicken, where I looked at my budget and I'm like, we spent like $120 on getting takeout chicken, and that's just not good for body or budget. And so stupid. Which is a great segue into number 3. Learn to shop for groceries and learn to cook-ish. Being good at shopping for groceries is a skill that is not talked about very much, but is very useful. When I moved to a new city, one of the first things that I do is kind of like scope out every place to buy groceries. Not just the grocery stores and getting the vibe of like what their pattern of sales is and such, but also like the little produce market on the corner and the ethnic market, and if there's a discount market. When we lived in Maryland, I eventually found out about this discount grocery market. It was like you had to drive like an hour in the middle of nowhere. It was like in the middle of fields, and there were like Amish buggies driving around and like pigs right behind the building. It was just this very random locale. You'd go in there and it was like you had entered the twilight zone of food, like bottles of kombucha, 10 cents. Fair trade organic chocolate, 10 cents. Organic cups of yogurt. Guess how much? 10 cents. This was almost 10 years ago, so I don't know if it's still 10 cents. It might, like inflation, it might be 25 cents now, but anyway. Good to know what stores are around you, what they charge for things, and to shop the sales. And also just to be realistic about what you are going to have time to make and eat, so that you have a well-stocked pantry and freezer, and you're less likely to go out because you have things that you actually will make and want to eat enough that you won't be tempted by eating out. So when I say learn to cook, I don't necessarily mean that you're going to be making like all these glorious meals from scratch. Sometimes I do, but a lot of times it's very much like a girl dinner situation, to quote a internet phenomenon. Sometimes it's just like a bag of frozen veggies, tossed on a pan, salmon burgers I got at the discount market, slap down a salmon burger, shove it all in the oven, cook it all, undercook the veggies a little, overcook the salmon burger a little. But you know what? It was easy, and it like one pan, and it was cheap because everything was on sale, and you know, it wasn't bad. Grocery prices across America are admittedly so different, and your options for groceries might be extremely different depending on what part of the country you live in, and I don't even know much about shopping in other countries. So, you know, this isn't going to apply to everyone, but I'd still say that having some meal planning, shopping, vague cooking skills definitely helps your budget, probably no matter where you live. And when I moved out, I did not know how to cook. All of my family, well, particularly my mom's side of the family, were all these great cooks, and I did not know a thing about how to cook. One of the first times I was like, I'm gonna make Dade this nice meal, and I made orange beef, and it was so hilariously bad. It was like one of those anime where the girl says like, I'm gonna make you a wonderful meal, and she's a terrible cook, and like it shows up like all burnt, and you see the guy like eating it with like tears running down his face. So what helped me to learn to cook was to get a subscription to a cheap cooking magazine and just like leave it in the bathroom and like read it casually to kind of get like an idea of some techniques and foods that match well together. And then if a recipe like really sounded good as well as realistic, I'd tear it out and I put it in a little binder. And when I went to the store, I'd try to look through it and be like, okay, I'm going to try that one this week. Slowly but surely, I started to get better at cooking, as well as just like understanding what flavors go well together, so that I didn't actually have to cook as much, but could just like toss a couple of things together and season them in a way that made sense. And the other thing that helped was to just try to be a little bit better. I had this thing when I was younger where like I could go to McDonald's and I'd just order whatever sounded good to me, and I wouldn't think about it whatsoever, even though you know if you do think about it at all that you're eating all the worst stuff that you can imagine. But since you can't see the ingredients and you're just like, oh, I'm out, it's fine. But then I'd go to the grocery store and suddenly it was like I was gonna have Gwyneth Paltrow over for dinner, and everything had to be the most pristine food that you could imagine. All the produce had to be organic. If there was any high fructose corn syrup or any questionable ingredient of soybean oil in the salad dressing, anything that gave me the tiniest red flag that this was not pure as the driven snow, then I was like, nah, this is probably a me thing. But anyway, in general, it's good to just be one step better than you were going to be on a normal day. Say you were going to get a takeout pizza and instead you had a frozen pizza and you added some veggies to it. Now you're eating better and you're eating a little cheaper. And then maybe the next time you get the pre-made crust at the grocery store and spread it yourself and kind of make the pizza yourself, but in a really low-key way. Like you're just kind of trying to get a little closer to cooking and a little closer to not just going out. Obviously, this only applies if you have a habit of going out or eating a lot of like expensive pre-made grocery store food that's just all done for you. If you're already cooking, then you don't need this advice. Number 4, don't have kids, which is a great time to talk again about life choices in general. Of course, if you want kids, you should have kids. Any of us could get hit by a bus tomorrow, but most of us are going to get enough time to have the kids, raise the kids, and still have some good years left where you could start your creative career at that point after the kids have moved out of the house, whereas you can't do it the other way. And it's good to remember that it is likely that your life is going to be too short or too limited on resources to do all the things that you dream of doing. This video in particular is about making the creative life your number 1 priority, because that was my number 1 priority. But that might not be your number 1 priority, and here in the middle of this video is a good time to remind you that if you chose a different path in life as you're watching this, you're already well along your way and you can't even take some of this advice because you already acquired college debt and you already had kids. And sometimes you might have those moments where you look at your friends and you wish that you had taken a different path. I mean, we all have those. I don't really want kids particularly, but sometimes I think it might be nice to be a person who traveled the world, or it might be nice to be an academic and like get a master's and a PhD and spend years of my life in college. Sometimes that sounds very romantic. Or I think, you know, no matter what you chose, you're going to have those moments where you can see those other versions of yourself and you kind of wonder about them. So I want to point out that choosing that life path, some of it you kind of fall into at times. Sometimes life throws unfortunate things at you and you don't always end up where you want to be. And sometimes the choice you made doesn't always feel exactly like it was the right one. It's not easy to decide what to do with your limited number of years. So please take a moment for whatever you may have accomplished, even if it wasn't quite what you wanted, even if not everything worked out, even if it seems humble or you've had to deal with a lot of unfortunate stuff. Please do be proud of the things that you have done, because they have mattered to someone and you don't have to do anything big and important to matter. It would be great sometimes to be a vampire who was 500 years old and was the master of the pen and the harpsichord and oil painting, was a mentor to 8 younger vampires over the centuries. But I would bet that even vampires sometimes are like, I wish I was a younger vampire so I could be in the moving pictures, but I just don't understand it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that accent. I spent a lot of time trying to think like what should be my vampire voice and they were all bad. Number 5, don't buy stuff. We already talked about this a little bit. Don't go into debt, but also just don't buy stuff. Every penny that you spend on stuff today is money that you had to earn yesterday or money that you have to earn tomorrow. And that might be taking away your creative freedom because now you're kind of enslaved to your stuff. Not just the stuff that you currently have, but the stuff that you are still craving, the stuff that is on your Amazon wish list and your eBay watch list. Of course, now is it easy not to buy stuff? No, not for me. I love to buy stuff. I have so many little collections of things. So you know, I bought some shit in my day. What I did do was learn to enjoy the hunt as much as the actual purchasing, to buy everything secondhand and to set limits on myself. Because even buying, like, even if you have the cheapest thrift store, which I live in a place now that has such a cheap thrift store, but man, it can still really add up. Not only can you spend a surprising amount of money on $1 items, but you also then can have another problem where you're spending a lot of time and like figuring out storage just to figure out what to do with all of your manga. One of my favorite things to do really is just to regularly read a book on minimalism or being frugal or like anti-consumerist topics, or to follow YouTubers who talk about no buy years and like the glut of crap everyone is buying, and anything to just like give me positive reinforcement that you don't need stuff and it's a dopamine hit that fades quickly, and reminding me of tips to not buy things so often or how to make wise choices about my purchasing. And it's still not always easy. Sometimes I still just impulse buy something and have that moment of like, I don't have time to read this book, but it helps. It helps me to do it less often. And of course, online, you can do the thing where you let things sit in your cart for a day or a week or whatever before you actually pull the trigger, so you can think about whether you really want the thing. If you like to go out and shop, you can give yourself a limited number of times you can go to the store, a limited number of items that you can buy while there. At one point I had a little card in my wallet with my credit cards with like a list of reasons like why to not buy a thing, and it had to pass the checklist before I would buy it. And when I do buy something that I really need, I try to invest in a good version of that thing so that it's a quality item and I don't have to buy it again anytime soon. I saved up money for a while to buy a nice vacuum cleaner, and it has lasted a very long time. Of course, I barely ever vacuum, so. Number 6. This one's the least fun one, but Work on your side hustle game. While I have never had a 9 to 5 job working for someone else, I have almost always had some kind of side hustle that I can pick up when things get rough and set aside when things stop being rough. And it has saved me on more than one occasion to just have some extra little skill or side business that I can lean on in times of trouble. And personally, I like my side gig to be something kind of boring, something that is not too closely related to writing. There are people whose side gig is like editing books, and if that works for you, that's great. But I feel like for me, I don't want to drain any of the brain power away from the books. The other good thing about a kind of boring or tedious side hustle is that it's usually a thing that like a decent amount of other humans don't want to do but need done. If you can think of a side hustle like that, it might be pretty reliable because you can always find someone who just doesn't want to do that thing. For me, that was always eBay. There's a lot of junk in the world, and I'm pretty good at sourcing it from thrift stores or auction houses because that is something that interests me. But it's also very tedious. Listing things on eBay is tedious and boring. And in that sense, I've been able to pick up work like, I'm in Maryland, there was a guy at the auction house who was a bookseller, but he mostly sold out of an antique booth in the antique mall. And then he sold a few things on eBay, but he had a bunch of stuff he didn't really want to deal with. So I ended up taking on some of his stuff, splitting the profits. It wasn't like great money, but it helped keep me going when I was in a rough patch, and it was pretty easy to find people who just have like stuff. That was also how I got the bookstore job, was basically selling myself as somebody who knows how to do eBay listings. I've also occasionally picked up work teaching other people how to eBay, and I usually get the vibe that as I'm teaching them, they're like, I don't want to do this. It's not the most glamorous job, but the hope is that you don't have to do it for too long. You only have to do it in a pinch. Number 7, secure cheap housing. Ooh, this is the worst one right now because it really helps if you can secure cheap housing, but it's not easy to do right now. I'm certainly not denying that housing really truly has gone up way more than wages in most places. And it's impossible to truly say, where is that all going? I talked about this a little bit in another video, but just to repeat the story, when I was in my 20s, the market was very similar. We were living in a condo that Dade's parents owned, and we were paying them rent. And the price of this condo almost quadrupled in like 7 years or so. It was crazy how much these places were going for. We were very fortunate that they had decided to like buy the apartment and rent it to us rather than us having to be on the open market for an apartment. That was definitely an instance of where I did have some privilege that was not like anybody's parents being super rich, but was partly luck and partly their generosity, because this condo was like $40,000. It was ridiculously cheap when they bought it, which, isn't to say that everyone's parents could just buy a condo, but it wasn't like they were, handing us money or anything. We had to pay the mortgage and the condo fees every month, and when we left, it wasn't ours. We didn't get to keep any of it. But nevertheless, it was a huge help, but I really wanted to have my own place that was not me paying money to my in-laws every month, and the market just seemed impossible. I was like, I'm never going to be able to afford a house. And then the 2008 crash happened, and over the next several years, housing prices just went way down. And we still had to move like 70 miles away from really anybody that we knew. We were in a fairly rural area, so we didn't really move where we would have moved if we had had more money. But even so, we were able to buy our first place. And there's no guarantee that that's going to happen again. And of course, in the 2008 crash, a lot of people lost their jobs or had other things happen where they weren't really in a position to buy real estate when it was bottomed out. So, it's not really something to wish for. I'm just saying that I've been there, and I don't know what will happen to people who haven't been able to buy a house yet in this current environment either. So all I can say is that having been through a boom and bust cycle myself, that It's good to be prepared in case there is a bust and to save money in case either there's a general bust or maybe you luck into a place that's a little bit of a fixer-upper, but it's a fixer-upper in a way that you can manage, or, maybe you hear about a smaller town somewhere that sounds like a little diamond in the rough that you can move to that's a little cheaper. Whatever circumstance might arise, it's a good idea to be just prepared and know what you need to buy a house and to have some savings if you can manage it. I know it feels very difficult and probably unmanageable for a lot of people, and I have nothing but sympathy, and I wish that I had more advice in this section, but the world is what it is. Final tip. Number 8, surround yourself with successful people and supportive people. It's very common for people who want to make a career in an artistic field to have skeptics around them. It might be your family telling you need a real job. It might be your friends being like, yeah, right. When I worked my first job, I had a bunch of people around me being like, you want to be a writer? Like, that's cute. It was especially bad because I ended up working at this first job for like almost 5 years, to the point where people would come back and be like, oh, you're still here. Oh, the writer girl, she's still here working at Sears. There's nothing more humiliating than realizing that you worked with a coworker 3 years ago and they've since moved on and you're still working at Sears and you told them you were going to be a writer and you're here. Those voices can really get to you and make it seem impossible. It just makes it feel like it's not a thing that could happen to you, that this is something for richer, fancier, smarter people. Whatever your insecurity is, it will just feel like you don't belong in that world. I really didn't get anywhere with my writing until I started mostly hanging out online. It's not like I had in-person friends, but hanging out with people who were taking writing very seriously, going to message boards. I mean, that was what we had back then. Message boards where like real published authors would be, and it made it slowly start to seem possible and accessible. Some of my ambitious friends got agents before me, and as other people around you get more successful, it starts to feel like, I could do this. They're doing it. They're my friend. We're like on par. I could do this too. And you start to see like what are the steps that you need to take, and they start to feel more manageable. And if you don't have friends yet, then another option also is just watching YouTube channels or following people online and just starting to see that those of us who have succeeded are very normal people. Some of us aren't even the most talented people or the most educated people or the most beautiful people or, whatever it is. Not everyone is the best at everything, but there is room for a lot of different people to make a living in the arts, believe it or not. There's also this constant idea that it was easier to make a living in the arts just before now. The boom has always just finished happening. I have been hearing this for my entire career, that the boom just ended and it's harder now than it was last year, 5 years ago. I think that is a comforting narrative that we sometimes tell ourselves to explain why things aren't happening for us and why it's not our fault. And there are genuinely times when there is kind of a boom. Things maybe get a little easier for more people for a time. But there's always going to be a hunger for some fresh thing to talk about. There's classics, there's nostalgia, there's all that. But there's also the excitement of something new that everybody wants a new thing to talk about and discuss and wait eagerly for the next installment and stuff. And there's no reason that new voice might not be you. And some of those new voices will have long careers. That also might be you. I think it's really important to have those voices around you that make it feel believable. It's very normal to feel unsure. It's very normal to fail a number of times throughout your career, both before you really succeed at all and in the middle of successes. But it's also quite possible that if you keep at it, there is a place for you. There are people waiting eagerly for you, and you just don't know it yet. And if you have voices around you that believe in you and support you, it gets easier. And I believe in you too. If a creative life is still what you want after you've heard me talk about eating overcooked salmon burgers and not buying anything and not traveling and not having children and not really doing anything else in life, then welcome. You'll probably have some bumps in the road. You may shed some tears if you are a tear shedder like I am, but you're also going to have that moment where something clicks for you, something succeeds, something resonates. And as always, I'm wishing you all the best, but really in the end, the most important thing is spending your limited time on this planet in a way that feels right to you, enjoying this wondrous world and being good to yourself and others in any way that you can. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. I hope you'll stick around for more content on both the practical and emotional side of the creative life, fantasy novels, world building, reading, nerdy stuff, all the usual. I appreciate you all for being here so much. If you have any other tips for succeeding in a creative life or just a frugal life even, feel free to share them in the comments. I always love to get some new tips or just things that I forgot. I'm like, oh yeah, that was a good one. And I'll see you next time. Bye. Hi, Coco. Hi, Coco. Hi, Coco. Come on, babe.